Hi, everybody. I almost said Captain King here. Professor King, here to talk about Chapter 19 of Everything's an Argument, which talks about synthesizing source information. But before I do that, I wanted to expand a little bit on what I talked about in the crap test video. I did mention that I was going to kind of share some sources with you and evaluate them side by side to show you why one is preferable over the other. And granted, they're going to be a little bit extreme, but that's to kind of highlight the differences so that when you look at them in more modified, or when you find your own sources in more modified forms, you can kind of, use the extreme examples as your model, right? So today, okay, the date today, proof of life, July 6th, 2020. So what's been going on in the news lately? Well, it's been all about this discussion of Beyonce being an Italian woman. I don't know if you've heard these stories, but a friend of mine shared them with me. I'm not obsessed with the story itself. I'm obsessed with the mental gymnastics that are involved in people actually believing this ridiculousness. I am so bowled over by the vastness of the human imagination to, be confronted with reality in such stark and meaningful ways, and yet still to just believe the most ridiculous conspiracy theories that again the human imagination can come up with. So I'm going to show you a couple articles on Beyonce, and one that has to do with this conspiracy theory versus one that's actually a scholarly journal article that you can access from the library website. And we're going to look at them through the lens of the crap test before we get to chapter 19, so that you can see what works and what doesn't in an academic setting. All right, so I'm going to take it to share screen in just a moment, but let me make sure I have my articles all queued up. All right, here we go. All right, so this is the first one. And if you look at my computer, you can see the title here is Beyonce's Anne Marie Lastrassi, asterisk, proof, close asterisk. And then it goes, and then you see the article here. So let's before we even scroll down, right? Let's look at this page. Again, when we talk about the crap test, we're talking about currency, we're talking about reliability, we're talking about authority, and we're talking about purpose and point of view, right? So let's think about those for a moment, right? And now look at this. What do you notice? What do you notice about this website? Well, first, the title is twtext.com. Does that sound scholarly? Probably going to have to say no on that, right? And then what do we see surrounding the textual information? We see an ad for Del Taco. We see an ad for what looks like bedding or a 4th of July sale. We see an ad for HostGator. We see an ad for Lyft. We see an ad for Creative Cloud. We see an ad for Sephora. Ad, right? What did one of the things from the crap test tell us? Oh yeah, if something is like covered in ads, it's probably not a scholarly source, right? Oh, here's another ad for Lexus. Great. Just ads aplenty, right? So let's look at the writing itself. What do we notice about the text, right? We've been inundated with the ads. There's very little text here, right? There's very little text. And what do we have as our evidence? We have someone whose name is JJW Webb on Instagram writing in a comments section saying that Beyonce isn't Black but a dark Italian. Okay, JJW Webb, how can I confirm your own scholarly background? Well, it looks like you're on Instagram, right? but I don't really know anything beyond that, right? Other than you are a tech warrior, right? You're a person who comments on social media posts. And again, we've all done it. I've commented plenty of things on social media posts. Like none of us are not guilty of that, right? Especially I've commented ridiculous things. I'm not going to lie, right? But that doesn't mean that we're all researchers, right? Or that we're all professionals in the field. Um, oh, then we start talking about the Illuminati Rising Star program. Okay. Alien telepathy, okay, and her parents are actually Italians. Well, here's a picture of Beyonce with her actual parents, the Knowleses, right? They've since divorced, but these are Beyonce's parents. And then just a bunch of pictures of Italian flags, which I personally don't really understand, but okay. So, and then there's this discussion of how Ariana Grande is this Anne-Marie Lastrasi's daughter, you know, and Lady Gaga, because Lady Gaga is Italian. Apparently all Italians are related, right? So they are somehow related too, because they were seen driving a car in a music video or something. Okay, these connections that we're making, right? Are they vetted with thorough research? No, right? Like they're not only are they tenuous, but like they're ridiculous. Um, Blue Ivy, right? Whose real name is apparently Balbina Esmeralda. But okay, and then Beyonce's birth photos of her twins, right? Um, Bringing us her real identity in her art. It's a demonic plot, right? And subliminal messages abound. Okay. And now a bunch more pictures of the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. Oh, and apparently the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper have an A and an M in it, so that means they were awaiting the, I don't know, the coming of the Antichrist Beyonce. Like, is this what we're getting at? Because and now we're Avril Lavigne's thrown in the mix for good measure. Why not, right? Why not? She's photographed with pizza, so clearly she's Italian. Only Italians eat pizza, right? So, or Neapolitan pizza, not Sicilian pizza. Oh, it's the reptilians, guys. That's what it is. So, here's what I'm trying to say about this. Is this information current? Well, yes, Beyonce is a living, breathing individual, and this information came out in the last, it's July 6th. It came out in the last 24 hours or so. So, yeah, it's current. We can say that, right? Is it reliable? Based on what we're seeing here, we have a lack of evidence. We have, now we're writing in all caps, which is, right, the true marker of reliability for anyone who's ever been on the internet ever. We have writing in all caps. We have very little text. We have evidence that makes no sense. We have a lot of jumping to conclusions. We have tenuous connections being made. We have ridiculous claims, which show a lack of objectivity, right? Not a lot of research in terms of, deep research. It's just like she's holding a pizza and stood in front of the painting of the Mona Lisa, so she's an Italian woman. And the pyramids of Italy. We all know about those, right? Like, yeah. So, but clearly, right, this is the problem with finding stuff off of Google. And yes, most of us are more discerning than to take something like this, but the stuff that we're getting off of Google, I promise you, is not much better than this, right? And that is the problem, is when you have a giant haystack and 95% of it is crap, and and you're going through that haystack to find the 5% of diamonds, the odds are you're gonna have the crap in with it, right? And a lot of it. So you want to stay away from Google. Now, let's say you're doing an article on Beyonce and you still want to maybe talk about, like, Beyonce and race or Beyonce and womanhood, because, like, if we think about these articles, right, really what's behind a lot of this information sharing are these very passive or subliminal messages of racism, right? Messages of sexism, right? She's only pretending to be Black because they make more money, and all of these. It's interesting that all of these people who are somehow involved in the Illuminati, who are demonic, right, are either women or a man of color, being Jay-Z, right? So, behind a lot of this information that we can't verify, that we can't vet, right, that is covered in ads and that is not well researched, are some very antiquated, stale, out of touch notions, right? And that's really the problem with the conspiracy theory community, is it kind of markets itself, the QAnon community, it markets itself as this very like, no, we know the real truth, right? Like we're the renegades, right? We are the anti-establishment. But really the majority of the information that it shares is very old-fashioned establishment, antiquated sort of thinking, sexism, racism, classism, religious hostility toward any particular religious groups that are not, Abrahamic or even Judeo-Christian really in nature. So we have to be critical thinkers and be aware of that, right? So now let's go to the library website, and I'm just going to scoot back. Okay. And go, if we go to the login, we go to library.fullcall.edu, we click on databases, we put in our ID. Yep. Oy. We put in our ID. And then it takes us to the search field, right? Let's just say Beyonce. Make it nice and easy. And here's the crazy thing. Some people think, oh, well, if I go to the library website, it's not going to talk about Beyonce. Beyonce's a pop star. Why would academics talk about Beyonce? Well, the reasons why academics would talk about Beyonce is if we think about how everything is a text and how a lot of Beyonce's text reach a mass audience, a worldwide audience of millions of people. And when I say her text, I mean her songs, her look, her brand, all of that, right? Then we can analyze her texts from an intellectual standpoint, right? It doesn't always have to be about like this highfalutin, sort of like theoretical stance. It can be things as sort of pop culture-esque as Beyonce, right? So let's look at this first one. And I want to show you how to use this a little bit further as we're talking more and more about research. But let's say, okay, so now we have over 3,000 articles on Beyonce. And you can streamline this further. You can talk about Beyonce and race, right? Then that would lead us to 55 articles. If we did Beyonce and gender, that gives us 23 articles, right? So again, the more search terms you put in here, the more narrow your sources that are going to come up, but also the more refined your search. So the more likely you're going to find something that relates to the topic you're looking for. But let's just go back to Beyonce, right? Let's just say, oh, I'll just examine, right? And the first one that comes up, Lemons or Lemonade, that's clearly a reference to her album that came out a couple years ago. Look at the title, Lemons or Lemonade, Beyonce, Killjoy Style, and Neoliberalism. Well, already we're using bigger words than the previous article we looked at. But let's say I want to make sure that I'm doing scholarly academic work, okay? So I want to limit to full text right here, because that means I'm going to be able to read the full article, which is what you need to do when you research. If you're just getting snippets and sound bites, you're not doing adequate research. Well, let's say I also want to just look at scholarly journal articles. I don't want to look at newspapers for now, right? I want to make sure I don't get any of these sort of like Newsweek or Business Insider Daily or Washington Post kind of articles, that I want to stick to academic articles. So I click on that. Publication dates 2000 to 2020. So it's pretty relevant. I would say within like 15 years. Maybe even more recent if we're talking pop culture, but just a current event, I would say within the last 15 years. So this article still comes up. See how we've narrowed it now down to 35 because we eliminated things like videos, news broadcasts, any sort of magazine articles, et cetera, et cetera. We're only looking at scholarly journal articles. And we still have tons of cool articles, right? We have the one we looked at. We have one on Beyonce and FKA Twigs, digital sampling and copyright infringement, right? Fostering classroom dialogue. So this sound, okay, so we're talking about human sexuality, right? We have all a number of things that we can look at. And always make sure that we have the full text, either PDF, HTML, or both, right? So I click on that PDF full text because the PDF full text will literally be like a copy of the original version, the original print version or the original online version, okay? We have the title, Women's Studies in Communication, 2020, volume 43, number 1, pages 45 to 66, okay? Written by Matthew Salzano from the Department of Communication at the University of Maryland, College Park, Maryland, USA. Okay, let me just see if I can find out anything about Matthew Salzano, right? So umd.edu, the communications department, there he is. So I can actually verify Matthew's background. MatthewSalzano.com. If we go to MatthewSalzano.com, first page, about me. He wants you to know his credentials, right? Rhetoric and political culture, University of Maryland, teaches, things he's published, you know, so you can go there. You can find out this information about him. He's there, okay? So we know that, one, we've got authority, right? We've got currency because this was published in 2020, right? We've got, you know, relevance depends on what you're researching, but let's say we're talking about Beyonce and neoliberalism. One way you can find out about relevance is when you go to these articles, look at the keywords and read the abstract. What an abstract is, it's usually a 200 to 500 word summary of what is discussed in the article, right? What is discussed in the piece. So these are going to tell you if this is going to be relevant to your research. So that way you don't have to read through all of this and then you get to the end and go, oh, this has nothing to do with what I'm researching, right? You can get a sense of if it is with the abstract and the keywords, okay? And purpose and point of view. Well, if we go back to Matthew Salzano's page, before we even read the article, right, he teaches courses about multimodal and public speaking, critical thinking, public deliberation, and rhetorical criticism. Stuff we're talking about in this class, right? Scholarship has appeared in women's studies, college media, the conversation, read about digital media, activism, you know, so that can tell us a little bit about Matthew's purpose in writing this, right? And we probably have a LinkedIn profile, an academia profile that again speak to this person's credibility, where he's coming from. So what this is all meant to say is, do you see, just looking at this page, right? We looked at the internet page, but just looking at this page, we've got cited sources, right? We've got subheadings, right? Like we've got in-text citations here according to MLA formatting even. We've got words like trans-historical and trans-situational, right? We've got discussions of other writers. We're putting ourselves in conversations with those other writers, right? Just a quick glance, we see all those things happening. Do we see advertisements? Nope. Do we see a bunch of irrelevant information like Googled Italian flags? Nope. Right? Does that mean that we're going to agree with everything in this article? Maybe not. Does it mean that we can critique some of the things that Salzano perhaps doesn't address? Of course, that's what we're supposed to do as writers. But this information that we're seeing here, right, is so much more helpful, relevant, important, scholarly, what you should be doing than that crap that you're finding off of Google, right? Pun intended. So that's going to help us when we think about research. Well, now let me go to chapter 19 because I am terrified that I'm just going to talk your ear off. I'm good at it. I'm really good at talking people's ears off, if you haven't already noticed, even if it's, you know, in an internet screen setting. So chapter 19 talks about synthesizing source information. These slides are pretty text heavy, so there's going to be a little bit of a like reading off of them. So please feel free to pause as you go. Let's dive in. So chapter 18 talked about evaluating sources. And what I just talked about with the CRAP test, applying the CRAP test, is looking at individual sources and evaluating them. Chapter 19 is talking about synthesizing multiple sources that we've already gathered and evaluated and read and are going to use in our essay, and thinking about how they're going to work together, right? So when we're thinking about all that, right, ask yourself, which of the sources I'm using set the context for my argument? Which give new information? Which ones make the audience want to read what I have to say? Because some are going to be more fun to read than others, you know, but that doesn't mean that the information in the drier articles isn't as, if not more valuable than the stuff that's in the more engaging text. Which provide essential data support and background information, which define or clarify concepts related to the argument. Again, which provide an appeal to ethos. We've talked about that at length at this point. Which illustrate difficult or technical aspects of your argument. I mean, thinking about the Salzano article versus the TW text article, it's a no-brainer, right? Like, Salzano's talking about things that are way more technical and complex than the TW text piece. Which sources provide the best counter-arguments and adequately address rebuttals, right? All of this is necessary to do when we are constructing argument. So you also want to learn how to not just quote properly, and Salzano's a great example of that, but you also want to be able to paraphrase. Because when you're gathering information, you're getting a lot of information. So you want to be able to put it in a succinct sort of condensed format while you're taking notes on all your sources, because you don't want to just cut and paste constantly. Cut and paste is not the marker of critical thought, right? Cut and paste is showing that you can cut and paste. Paraphrasing, putting a writer's thoughts or ideas into your own words, shows that you have this capable understanding of the source, right? And it shows that you respect the source. As you're, excuse me, reading the source, take notes. Make sure it's in your own words. Why is that, Professor King? Why do I have to put it in my own words and not just cut and paste? Here's why. The more you cut and paste, the more when you submit to turnitin.com, it's going to see that as someone else's work, right? If you're capable of paraphrasing, it's showing that you're doing the critical thought work of putting it into your own language. So direct quotes are great for certain things. If you really want to crystallize an idea, paraphrases show that you've done the bulk of the work, right? That you can take a lot of information and explain it to people in a relatable way. So let's talk summarizing sources that you'll examine, okay? So unlike paraphrase, summary covers just the gist of an idea, but it uses all your own words. Be able, when you're reading a text, to identify the thesis and explain it to yourself in plain language before you get to the writing, right? If you make notes, if you make comments, make sure you don't confuse them with the source itself. A lot of students do this and, you know, kind of get lost on, oh gosh, is that what I said or is that what the source said, right? One great way of doing this is kind of like the color coding that we did on your essays. You can color code in your note taking, right? Always recheck your notes against the source to make sure you summarized it capably and in your own words. One great way of doing this, if you're ever worried, is to push Control F or Command F, depending on what type of computer you have, and it'll create a little search box where you can write in the entire sentence that you're worried about. Like, oh gosh, did I say that or did Bell Hooks say that, right? And if you write that sentence in, if that sentence is the writer's, it'll show up in that writer's text. If it's yours, it won't, right? Make sure you include just enough information to cover the main points. But also, here's something that's really smart. Label the note with information on how you'll use the source in your paper. And the how doesn't always have to be some grand explanation. It's just like background information or evidence for body paragraph 2 or segue into a counter argument, right? So like you could just put like counter argument or BP2 or background, right? And, or again, you could just color code it with a key and that'll give you information on how to do that. And always make sure you're citing properly and thoroughly. One thing that I do is I create a notes and quotes page, and for every different article I have, I use a different highlighter color. So I take all the notes and then I highlight, you know, let's say if I'm using Salzano is yellow, right? And then I get another article from, you know, Jesse Hardy McCormick, and that article, I put everything in light blue, right? I get another one from Lionel Peckinpah, right? And that one's all in a light purple or lavender, right? So then that way when I'm cutting and pasting it into my essay and I go, oh shoot, who said this quote? Who said this phrase? I totally forgot. I have the color there. And that way I go, oh, it's Violet. Who's Violet? Oh, it's Lionel Peckinpah. Okay, I'll put that in the parenthetical citation. You know, use different tools that help you so that you don't get lost. And when you use quotations, use them selectively and strategically. Here's when you should use quotations. When the quote says perfectly what you need to say in order to support your argument. If there's anything extraneous that you want to hop over, ... Ellipses are used for inside of quotes, not at the beginning, not at the end, but ellipses show that you're just hopping over information that you don't need to share with your reader. You can use quotes when the author is a respected authority, and using that work would greatly influence your appeal to ethos. When an author is like specifically talking to someone else in the field and challenges them, right? But again, use and label quotes carefully. Use that color coding method that I talked about. If you're using print books, use Post-it tabs of different colors. And don't distort quotes or take them out of context, right? So keep all that in mind, right? Like if somebody comes out and says Black Lives Matter, and in the quote you just say lives matter, right? That's what we're talking about of distorting quotes or taking them out of context. You want to use the quote in as much of its entirety as you can so that you're not misquoting what the original source is saying. Again, I know this is a lot, and I'm kind of barreling through it, but it's all right there in front of you. So if you need to pause and return, that's not a bad idea. So a couple of things that a lot of trapped students fall into. These are just kind of like the mechanics type stuff that I see in a lot of essays that I like to remind people about. When you have a quote within a quote, it's 2 quotation marks, and then the quote within the quote is bookended by single quotation marks, okay? Make sure to frame and introduce your quotes, right? X states, so-and-so states, quote, parenthetical citation, right? Or if you paraphrase or summarize, you still have to put the parenthetical citation at the end of that paraphrase or summary. And it's always last name, page number, and MLA. Don't go overboard with the block quotes, right? Only use the parts of the quotes that are absolutely necessary. And again, use those ellipses, ... to omit unnecessary material. Never at the beginning or end of a quote, only somewhere in the middle where you're jumping over information that you don't need to share with your reader. And use square brackets if you need to substitute your own words into a quote, right? So like, whenever you see square brackets, like, let's say like, sorry, my pit bull's looking at me like she wants to go outside. You know, if in the quote, the person is saying like he, and they're referring to like Kanye West, in your brackets, in, you know, instead of putting he, because you want to make sure people know you're talking about Kanye West, in brackets you would put Kanye West, right? To let the readers know who that person is talking about. But again, don't misquote, don't use them to misquote, don't use them to mislead your reader. Oh, good, last slide. And then make sure you connect the sources in a project, in an essay, in whatever you're using them for, to your own ideas. Whether it's to establish context, again, to review background and literature on the subject, introduce a term or define a concept. One that the audience is not familiar with though, right? Do not do the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines racism as, right? Because your audience is aware of those things. And that's a really cheap and flimsy way of starting off with a hook. And you know how I feel about hooks. I don't like them. So only concepts that are esoteric, right? That are unfamiliar to the reader. Presenting technical material, developing or supporting a claim is when you want to connect sources to your own ideas. Highlighting differences or counter arguments, or and finally, just avoid patch writing. And when I say patch writing, I mean sometimes essays just start to read like a series of quotes and a series of information from sources. Again, you need to sandwich that information inside of your own claims and your own analysis, your own argument and your own discussion of the purpose of why you're sharing that argument. You need to do that work. That is your critical thought. The evidence is only one step. The research is only one step in the process, and it's a very complex process, right? So do not get out of the habit of having others speak for you. Take the information of what others say and do something with it. So that's what I mean by avoiding patch writing. So I know this was intense, right? Most of my Zoom meetings, my videos are, but I hope you got something out of it. If you have questions, always feel free to contact me, and I will see you all in cyberspace very soon. Bye.